Well, I hope that you might have that passage open from Luke chapter 15 as we explore this message. And I wanted to thank the Reverend Dr. John Dixon for the use of some of his material in today's message. You know, there were times when I was a dad of much younger children when I would get very angry at my children for something that they'd done. And they never did anything really terrible. But there were times when I would lose my temper in ways in which I'm now ashamed of. And I would actually ask for forgiveness for the way that I'd reacted. One thing was clear to me, and I hope was also clear to them, that at no time when they were bad did I ever stop loving them. But sometimes I was concerned, was I giving my children the impression, by the way I reacted, both to good behaviour and bad behaviour, that acceptance is dependent on their performance? Well, they were going to learn that in lots of other ways in their life, weren't they? Academically, acceptance is dependent on performance. On the sporting field, acceptance is dependent upon performance. Musically, in the choirs they joined or the ensembles they played with, or doing music for the HSC, acceptance is dependent on performance. In the workplace, acceptance dependent on performance. Even amongst their friends, to a point, acceptance is dependent on performance. But at home, that's the one place where that mantra should be completely overturned, where they should know that love, that acceptance, is not in any way dependent on performance, where dads and mums and children know that they are loved even when they are bad. Well, today we are wonderfully reminded that there is one other place where people can know they are accepted even if they're bad. According to Jesus, the Creator's acceptance of his children is not dependent on their performance. If I can put it like this, he loves them even when they are bad. The opening scene of the passage Steve read for us describes for us the two groups that were intrigued by Jesus' teaching. Have a look with me at verses 1 and 2. The two groups were the immoral and the moral, the irreligious and the religious. Have a look at the opening line. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him, but the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And this is the context of the teaching of the prodigal son. Jesus has been fraternising with the wayward, to the annoyance of the religious. And the reason that there are two sons in this hypothetical scenario is because Jesus has a message for both of the two groups. The sinners are to see themselves in the younger son, and the religious are to see themselves in the older son. And both are to see in Jesus' description of the Father the great love of God. Now, perhaps there's no other passage more appropriate for Father's Day than this. Let's look firstly at the younger son. Clearly, the younger son equals the sinners which Jesus befriends. As such, we get a glimpse as to how Jesus defined sin. We often relate sin to various vices, drinking, swearing, theft, sex outside of marriage, etc. There's a convenience to seeing sin that way, because those of us who don't indulge in any of those things console themselves that, well, we're not sinners. But Jesus' definition is far less convenient and way more unsettling. What does the son do? Verses 12 and 13. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. So he demands his share of the inheritance. The father, shockingly, gives it. The son leaves the household and spends all his share on himself. You see, he wanted his dad's resources, but wanted nothing more to do with his dad. Parents, imagine this scenario. Can you imagine one of your children asking you for their share of the inheritance, but wanting it before you die, almost thereby wishing you were dead? And then they take it, they take off, never seeing you again. In Palestinian society in the first century, the insult was even greater than what it sounds to our ears today. So let's be clear, this is Jesus' description of the sinner. Sinners are those who want all that the Creator has to offer, yet nothing to do with the Creator himself. Sinners, you see, stake their claim on the resources of God happily, that God provides in this world: relationships, food, money, sport, the beautiful environment, but decide to enjoy these, revel in these, at a distance from God himself. On this definition, who of us could not claim to be a sinner? Australians are experts at enjoying the pleasures of creation while ignoring their Creator. Our papers, our magazines, our TVs, our movies are full of this sort of thing. People whining and dining, and sex is free, and fashion and sport, and inciting us to buy and enjoy. All great gifts from God, but we almost never thank God for them, seek his advice on their use, or apologise for the misuse of his good gifts. Australians, like the young son, keep their emotional, relational distance from their Creator. So in Christian understanding, sin is not so much about morality, breaking this rule or that. It's about relationships. It's about broken relationships. Yes, with other creatures, but yes, and especially, breaking relationship with your Creator. Now, sinners deserve judgment. Everyone in Jesus' audience was expecting there to be some result for the younger son in terms of what he did with his father. But when the son returns in verses 18 and 20, the audience expects anger from the father and some form of punishment, but then Jesus unsettles us again. He's not only unsettled us in his redefinition of sin, now he's going to unsettle us in his striking description of God. So let's look secondly at the father. Verse 20. So he got up and went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." Look at the beautiful elements of the father's reaction. Firstly, verse 20, the father runs. That was unheard of. He embraces and kisses his wayward son. This was even before the son had said anything. Secondly, the father doesn't wait to hear the end of the son's well-rehearsed apology. He had this speech pre-prepared, and it concluded, as he rehearsed it in verse 19, "I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men." But when he came to deliver the speech in verse 21, the father interrupts his son before all of those words could be gotten out. This is masterful storytelling by Jesus. And then thirdly, instead of placing restrictions on the son or grounding him or making him like a hired hand, the father lavishes good things on him. Verse 22, but the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate." Oh, friends, this is Jesus' description of God. At the first sign of return, there is acceptance before a blurted apology even ends. Contrary to popular perception, God is not looking for reasons to deprive you of his blessings. No, he wants you to enjoy them, but in close proximity with him. According to Jesus, God is a searching, running, embracing, pardoning, partying parent, wanting to welcome those who return to him. No one knew this better than Jesus. For 18 months later, Jesus would die for sinners, to make it possible for anyone who wants to return to the Father, forgiven and reconciled through Jesus' death on the cross. But Jesus is not finished here. Not only does this parable that Jesus tells redefine sin and sinner, not only does it redescribe God, finally, Jesus wants to expose the empty religion of his opponents, represented in the reaction of the second son. So let's look thirdly at the older son. Verse 28. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all of these years I've been slaving for you and have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Friends, the older brother represents the Pharisees, the teachers, the religious of the day, of whom it was said back in verse 2, remember? They muttered, "This man eats with sinners," and welcomes them. As such, the older son offers us insight into Jesus' critique of religion. By his own confession, verse 29, the older son adopts a stance towards his father of a slave to a master, not a son to a father. Verse 29, but he answered his father, "Look, all of these years I have been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders." Friends, that's what religion does. It turns spirituality into morality. It turns faith into begrudged slavery. It approaches the gift of divine mercy as if it were a reward for good performance. The result? A completely stunted experience of the Father's mercies towards him. What does the Father say? What does he say? You never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends, but clearly, this son's view, perspective, outlook is just stunted. It's angry. It's begrudging. In reality, verse 31, the father would have given everything. "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." Friends, the older son, the religious people, had a stunted grasp of the father's mercies to others. So the older brother became angry and refused to go in. Precisely what the Pharisees had been doing. Annoyed, angry at Jesus' love for the sinner. They were angry and refused to acknowledge Jesus' vision of a God who welcomes sinners home. Here is the strange thing. Although the older son is geographically proximate, spiritually or relationally, he is miles away. He might as well have been in a foreign land. Perhaps some of us have religion rather than the living faith Jesus invited us to enjoy. We obey, but out of duty instead of relationship. As a result, you neither revel in God's mercy to you nor rejoice in his mercy to others. Present in church sometimes, but absent from God. Jesus' hypothetical about a father with two sons is designed to call you home as well. Here we are on Father's Day. We have the perfect picture of a father who is God himself, who is full of grace and love and compassion and welcome and generosity. But some, like the younger son, want everything the father has to offer, but want nothing to do with the father. And others, like the older son, obey out of a begrudged sense of duty and just get angry at any notion of God's mercy and kindness to the undeserving when they've been slaving away forever. I'd like to close with a modern story of returning home to our Creator. Alexander Zatsepar was a young soldier in the Russian army in World War II. Raised under Stalin, his worldview was completely atheistic. His whole life had been lived at a distance from his Creator. But that distance seemed to close one night during the bloody battles on the Eastern Front of the second half of the war. Gazing up from his bunker just hours before a scheduled attack, he pondered his Maker. And in a moment of clarity, he penned a letter to his Creator. The letter was found in the dead soldier's pocket the next morning. It reads, "Hear me, O God. Never in my lifetime have I spoken to you, but just now I feel like sending you my greetings. From childhood on, they always told me you are not. I, like a fool, believe them. I have never contemplated your creation, and yet tonight, gazing up out of my shell hole, I marvelled at the stars above me and suddenly knew the cruelty of the lie that you don't exist. Will you, my God, reach your hand out to me, I wonder? At midnight we are scheduled to attack. As you will know, the fighting will be cruel. Even tonight, I may come knocking at your door. Although I have not been a friend to you before, still, will you let me enter now, if I do come?" If Jesus' description of God is the right one, and his death and resurrection were the effective means of cancelling the debt we owe, then Alexander's question must have found an answer in the affirmative. You may not have been a friend of God before. You may have been keeping your distance, ironically, perhaps as a religious person, or perhaps as non-religious. Either way, Jesus today wants all of us to hear again of the Father's welcoming love. He wants us to learn afresh of the impact of his own death and resurrection for sinners. And he wants us, if we've not already done so, to return home to the Father. To say with Alexander's Adzapar, "Although I have not been a friend to you before, still will you let me enter now, if I do come?"